Hey students, tonight we're going to talk about shifting for quadratic equations. Okay, so let's review. Quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, when we're talking about shifting, all we are looking at is going to be the ax squared, and we're going to look at the c values. Okay, we do not care about b in this class. So, we're looking at the new equation we're going to be looking at is y equals ax squared plus c. Okay, again, there is going to be no b value when we're talking about shifting. Okay, again, that's only for this class. When you move up to Algebra 2, then you'll talk about what b does. Okay, so let's first look at what a does. So my a value does two things. The first thing it does is it flips the graph. So if I have a positive a, then my graph is going to look like this. Hold on, let me draw it. If I have a positive a, my graph is going to open upwards. Okay, so it opened upwards. Okay, and if I have a negative a, so if my a is negative, then my graph is going to open downwards. Okay, so it's going to open downwards. It's going to make like an N shape. Okay, so that's the first thing that a does. The next thing that a does is a determines if the graph is more narrow or wide. Okay, so it determines whether my graph is narrow or if it's wide. And how we determine that? We just determine it by looking at the numeral. Only. Okay, we're just looking at the numeral only. If it's a negative number, we take the negative, we cover up the negative, and we just look at the number, the numeral. Okay? And if it gets smaller, if the number gets smaller, then that means the graph is getting wider. Okay? So if the number gets smaller, closer to 0, the graph is going to get wider. And if the number gets larger, then it gets more narrow. Okay, so those are the two things that A does. A flips the graph, and it determines if the graph is wide or narrow. Okay, and now let's talk about what C does. So, if we look at C, the C value, so if I have the equation y equals ax squared plus c, I'm now just looking at what does C do. Okay, so I want to know what C does. And C moves the graph up or down the y-axis. Okay, so you're going to move up or down the y-axis. That's what your C does. So if the number is increasing, it moves up. And if the number is decreasing, it moves down. Okay? So C moves up or down the y-axis. Okay, now let's take a look at 4 examples. Okay? So make sure that you copy this first example down. So pause the video, copy it down so you know what we're doing tomorrow in class. All right, so now let's look at it. It says, how would the graph of the function y equals x squared plus 3 be effective if it was changed to y equals x squared minus 6? So we're going from y equals x squared plus 3, and we're going to change it to y equals x squared minus 6. So if we look at both of the equations, which value was affected? Was it the A value or the C? You're correct. It was C. If we look, the C value changed. Now, we need to know how it changed. So what did I do to 3 to get a negative 6? Okay, so we can do it 2 ways. You can look at it and figure it out, or you can draw a graph. Okay, so if I draw a graph, if I look at it from a graph, okay, I start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. So I start at, my starting point is this positive 3. So I'm going to start at a positive 3, which is right up here. And I'm going to move to negative 6. Okay, so let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's where I ended. So what did I do? I moved down 9 units. So that's how my graph was changed. It moved down 9 units. Or you could look at your equation. If I subtract 9 from 3, I will get a negative 6. So you could draw yourself a little graph over here, and you just notice I just looked at the C value. I didn't care about the whole entire graph, and I just moved it down. All right, let's look at our next example. For this example, I need you to pause your video, write it down. All right, so it says, how would the graph of the function y equals 2x squared be effective if it was changed to y equals negative 1/3 x squared? Okay, well, we can look at our 2 equations and see what happened to it. Okay, and so what changed? Well, you're right, the A value changed. If we look, our A value is different. So what did A do? A flipped it, and it made it narrow or wider. So let's see. We went from a positive to a negative. So since we went from a positive number to a negative number, my graph flipped. And then we said if the number got smaller, what happened? So let's look back at our notes. If the number gets smaller, the graph gets wider. So my graph got wider as well. Okay, if I just look at the equation. Now, if I want to graph this, I'm going to graph it on the calculator, and I'm going to type in the 2 equations. And since I'm comparing, I want to make the second graph a thicker, so I'm going to make that thick line in front of the y squared, and I'm going to graph. If you look, the second graph flipped directions, so it's now making an N shape, okay? And it also got wider. It expanded. So that's how my graph got affected. All right, so let's look at the next example. What would the new equation be if y equals x squared minus 6 was shifted up 8 units? So I have this equation, and I want to shift it up 8 units. Okay, well, since I'm going up, I'm going to add. I'm going to add 8. Now, which value talks about shifting? Up or down? That would be my C value. So that means I'm going to add 8 to this 6 and get my new equation. So I have y equals x squared, because I didn't change those, and then negative 6 plus 8 would give me a positive 2. So y equals x squared plus 2 is my new equation. All right, in our last example, make sure you pause the video and you write this one down as well. How can the graph of y equals 3x squared be obtained from the graph y equals negative 4x squared? So this one's backwards. It's asking how, it's saying that I started with y equals negative 4x squared, and I'm going to end with y equals 3x squared. Okay, so how did this graph come from this graph? What did I do to this graph to get this graph? Okay, so make sure you read the wording to know which graph you're starting with and which graph you're ending with. So what value changed? Well, our A value did. So if we look, I went from a negative to a positive, so we know that the graph flipped because I changed my signage. And then I cover up the negative and I look. From 4 to 3, did that number get bigger or did it get smaller? Well, it did get smaller. And so since it got smaller, again, look at your notes. If the number gets smaller, the graph gets wider. And so my graph got wider as well. Now, it won't always get wider. That just happened in our examples. Okay? So make sure that you understand this. Make sure that you've taken notes. We will be grading your notes tomorrow in class, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Adios.